So for today's video, I prepared 3 examples of not so great answers to some behavioral questions. And the primary reason for sharing this with you, because I want you to understand a couple of strategies going into a behavioral interview. And the first question is the rather standard, tell me about the time when you failed. So what if you had an answer such as, I had a report which I failed to deliver 2 months ago to my manager, and because of some unforeseen events, I actually had to delay the delivery of that report. However, it was not really a biggie because I could deliver it a bit later and it was fine. It was not a mission critical thing. I essentially take it as a failure because, it's never good to fail a deadline. Right? So if we look at this answer closely, we could argue, yes, it is a failure, although it's not a proper failure. And we could also argue that, hey, there are not many learnings from it. Although I did say that I'm well aware that it's not good failing deadlines. So it's a so-so answer. And the reason why I'm giving this example, because I had the opportunity to coach and to speak to many HR professionals going through these behavioral interviews. And I tell you from experience, they too struggle coming up with a proper failure. They too struggle assessing whether a failure is something that you actually learned from. So my point is that during a job interview, when giving such an answer, probably the most important thing is not how you say your answer, because the story is, not the best possible quality probably, but to listen carefully to how your interviewer reacts to the story that you're telling, because most of the time the other side will give you essential clues as to how your performance goes during the job interview. The simplest example here would be, for example, a bar raiser would immediately challenge you on these things. Hey, but what about that? Was that a proper failure? I mean, how bad was it? And by how long did you fail to deliver that? Was it a delay of 1 month, or how bad was it? And the other part where I challenge you in the learnings, of course, were, okay, but did you grow from this experience, or was it just, a one-off thing that you just were able to move on from? So by listening carefully to how they interpret your answer, you can immediately tell how your answer is perceived. And I gave you a so-so example because I wanted to make my point here that it's not necessarily a so-so answer in your interviewer's eyes. It might be a great answer if their standards are not as high as you would expect. And if you manage to catch this during a job interview, I believe your chances to listen carefully and to read the room much better will significantly increase, because when a person does not have extremely high expectations, then you could adapt to to sell yourself better according to their expectations, right? So this is the primary takeaway from this failure story. So listen carefully, even if you don't have the best possible failures. By listening carefully and by understanding what they're after, you could score many more points in this scenario. The second answer I want to talk about here is, how do you deal with ambiguity? I use a holistic approach to deal with most ambiguous situations. Data is something I ensure is available, even predictions if possible. Then the other side is to use my judgment and, why not, gut feeling where appropriate. When there's something I'm not the best or have a doubt about, I will not hesitate to ask for help. I will do whatever needed in order to ensure the best outcome. If we'll do a little effort here, we can even say this is a star answer, right? Because there is a situation, an action, and some result, some sort of result there, right? But essentially, this is a fake answer, because you don't talk about something specific, something quantifiable. If you want, you're just giving your thoughts about such a situation. Now, why am I using this as an example? I'm using this as an example because this might actually fly in a job interview with a not such a perfect interviewer, but more importantly, when you don't have the best possible example, that one specific situation that you were hoping to be able to talk about in a job interview. And this could happen for many reasons. Either you just used your story, your best story for that, and you no longer have it. Either you have a story that you believe is so-so, and you'd rather not say that story and rather go general. So this is a rather generic answer. Now, what's the use case for this answer? Because this is not a disqualifier, so to be clear, in any behavioral interview, the use case of this scenario to give a generic answer is to win time primarily, if you don't have a better story. And on the other hand, there are interviewers with whom these stories will actually fly, and they will serve as the starting point of a conversation, hopefully. And they will probably dive deeper, if you want, to find a specific scenario of a specific time where, for example, you were not the expert and you delegated that task. But all in all, the essential thing, the main takeaway from this example is that you could be generic in your answers. If you don't have something, if you don't have a story that's high quality enough, and then take it from there. So this is much better when compared to giving a bad answer or not having an answer at all. Even if you don't have the best answer, if you understand, if you have a clear path of how do you deal with ambiguity and you take all the most scenarios in mind, that's still a fine answer and they could eventually follow up from there. The third scenario I want to touch upon here is a weakness. Some people will tell you that you should use weaknesses that are hidden strengths of yours, and while others, like me, for example, will say that these things will never ever fly. And I believe there's another point of view you might want to take into account here, that is your branding. Like, for example, if you see yourself using the weakness, I'm a perfectionist, do you believe that's the best way to brand yourself during the job interview? Or if you say, I work too hard, do you believe that's the best way to brand yourself during a job interview? Given the role that you're applying for, I'm assuming you're applying for a role with a high-performing company for a six-figure job. Do you want to be perceived as someone who works too hard for that role? Do you think that's the main criteria of success for that if you want to disguise your strength? Or do you want to tell them I feel stressed under pressure? Do you believe that's something that you could feel comfortable selling yourself on during a job interview? And I believe that this, if you look at it this way, that the way that you want to brand yourself during a job interview, and essentially, you're talking about the weakness, so it cannot be something very positive, but would you feel comfortable going into that direction of branding yourself as someone who's a perfectionist? Which to me, it's a terrible idea to say, so to be clear, or you work too hard. I mean, how could you not work hard if you're applying for such jobs? Or you feel you get stressed under pressure, then, probably a high-performing company is not the best place to work for you then, So by looking at this from a candidate, from your brand's perspective, I believe it's much easier for you to understand or to agree with me that these weaknesses are not the best. All in all, I would very much encourage you to use proper weaknesses. I can give you also a couple of examples here, but the better you brand yourself, even using weaknesses, and the better you sell yourself on these weaknesses, the better it will be perceived in a job interview. And interviewers are very sensitive on these things. Like, they will immediately spot if you use a weakness that's simply not you, that is not representative, or it's, even if it's a very generic one, because they can hear dozens of such weaknesses every day in these interviews. And remember one last thing about weaknesses. It's not necessarily the weakness that's the most important, but the way you sell yourself on it. So I'd very much encourage you to take it more seriously than you would have probably taken it so far. And I would even encourage you to prepare it together with your strength. In other words, first prepare your strength and then think about what weakness could you possibly use, because that's something that, in my experience, can actually make a difference. So these were the three scenarios I wanted to share with you in order to help you to better understand how a behavioral interview is perceived and how it evolves and how to eventually improve your chances to do well. So hopefully you found this interesting.